Good afternoon. We're so happy to have all of you for a packed house. This is awesome. Before we get started with introductions, I thought it might be helpful for us to know who's in the audience because we are at a Startup America Partnership stage here. How many of you in the room are startups, are entrepreneurs? Okay. How many of you are thinking of doing crowdfunding for your projects or your campaigns? Awesome, awesome. So we want questions from you this afternoon. My name's Candace Klein. I am the founder and CEO of 2 startups. So I'm an entrepreneur first, and I am the founder of Bad Girl Ventures. I am a bad girl. And I also own a crowdfunding platform called SoMoLend, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But more importantly than me, we've got some amazing speakers here today. We're very, very lucky to have the founder of the Startup America Partnership, as well as AOL, Steve Case. We have Senator Mark Warner, and we will have all of them give their introductions. We have Jason Best, who is the founder of the Startup Exemption and runs Crowdfund Capital Advisors and wrote the book Crowdfunding Investing for Dummies. And we have Slava Rubin, who is the founder and CEO of IndieGoGo. So give these guys a round of applause. All right, so we're going to start off with some introductory and opening remarks, and so we'll kick it off with you, Steve.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here and great to see a lot of people kind of talking about crowdfunding. To quickly set the stage, most of you, the fact that you came to this and there's so many different options at South by, you probably know what we're talking about. But basically, the idea is to democratize access to capital for entrepreneurs, and also democratize access to investing for people who want to invest in this sector. There are places in our country that do have access to capital, and if you you're an entrepreneur with an idea, you may have easy access to capital. But most parts of the country, that's not true. They do not have the angel networks or the seed investors in the vast majority of our nation. As a result, entrepreneurs have basically 2 choices: give up on their idea and just say, I guess it's not meant to be, or move to a place that does have access to capital. What crowdfunding does is essentially enable them to stay where they are if they'd like to stay there and raise capital by getting their idea out there into the marketplace. And if people are intrigued with that idea, lots of people making small investments will give them the first, few $100,000 they need to get that idea onto the playing field and really give it a shot. So I think it's very important in terms of creating a broader entrepreneurial ecosystem, which is what the Startup America effort is all about. How do we build up these regions and have a broader ecosystem across our country? There's a lot of aspects of building a company, as you all know, but access to capital is obviously a critical ingredient, and that's been a problem for many entrepreneurs, which then makes it a problem for our country because the data from the Kauffman Foundation is pretty compelling. Last 3 decades, 40 million jobs have been created by young, high-growth entrepreneurial companies, startups, and it accounts for really all the net job creation in the past 3 decades. So if you're worried about our unemployment rate in our nation, which is getting a little bit better, but still kind of close to 8%, the place to focus is on startups. If you're worried about our economic growth rate, which is below 2%, which is not really sustainable in terms of all the priorities we want to fund as a nation, the place to focus to drive that growth rate up is entrepreneurship. And if you're worried about our global competitiveness, because there are a lot of countries that have figured out that the secret sauce has driven the American economy, driven the American story, made us the leading economy in the world, made us the leader of the free world, is the work of startups and entrepreneurs. And so we really need to focus on it for that reason as well. So there are a lot of things that need to be done from a policy standpoint, but where the rubber meets the road is in the regions all across the country where entrepreneurs, including people in this room, have ideas, and crowdfunding is a way to get that on the field. I'll let the people who are working on the specific platforms talk about them. The good news, and I'll turn it over to my longtime friend for probably over 20 years, Senator Warner, is that on this one issue of access to capital for entrepreneurs, last year, even though Republicans and Democrats in an election year did not agree on much of anything, they did come together.
No.
And
Newsflash.
And passed almost a year ago the Jobs Act, the Jumpstarting Our Business Startups Act.
Round of applause. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
And there are a number of aspects to that, including an on-ramp for IPOs and things like that. A critical ingredient was crowdfunding. That's the good news. The bad news is, even though it was passed by Congress and signed in the Rose Garden by the president last April, it's still not actually happening yet because the SEC has to write some rules which they have not yet written. I'm sure we'll talk about that, but hopefully that will happen in the not too distant future. So that was one piece of good news, and it was the leadership of Senator Warner and others that really kind of focused on that in a bipartisan way. Now the focus, and I'll let Senator Warner talk more about it, is not only implementing that crowdfunding statute through the SEC and also FINRA, another agency, but also passing something called the Startup Act 3.0 that Senator Warner introduced in a bipartisan way with a variety of other Republicans and Democrats that deals with other important issues around entrepreneurship and making sure we remain the most entrepreneurial nation, the most important of which is passing new legislation around immigration so we really can attract and retain the best and brightest to come here and stay here and start companies here, as opposed to training them, giving them great educations, giving them PhDs, giving them masters, and then all too often kicking them out of the country, forcing them to go to other countries to start companies there that compete with companies here. So the senator has provided great leadership on this issue. There's several bipartisan proposals around high-skilled immigration. In the next 90 days or so, I think there is an opportunity, an opening, a moment where I think Congress can come together, not just around high-skilled immigration, but as part of a more comprehensive solution, which I think is going to be required to get this passed. So it's good news in terms of the policy framework, and D.C. has made good progress, and the senator gets a lot of the credit for that, but there's still a lot of work to be done. With that, I'll turn it over to Senator Warner, and then we'll hear more about the specific crowdfunding platforms and how you, as an entrepreneur soon, once the SEC writes the rules, will be able to use these platforms to raise money to start a company or to fund other companies in sectors you care about or regions you care about.
Now, Senator Warner, you are an entrepreneur.
Right.
You came at this. It should be a prerequisite for every elected official to first be an entrepreneur. I think we'd have a lot less problems, maybe less sequesters. But I'm curious, from the perspective of an entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, and now a public policymaker who is really the champion for startups right now in Washington, D.C. What do we need as entrepreneurs? What are the keys to success for us?
Thank you. Let me say I'm glad to be here. Sorry I'm running a little bit late. Those street closures are kind of a challenge. Let me also say thanks to my good friend, 20-plus years, Steve Case. When we went through that whole litany of all your things, we had one of the least successful angel investor clubs in the late 90s, but we had a hell of a lot of fun.
That's why I'm betting on crowdfunding. I'm not betting on this guy. I'm betting on my own venture.
I was an entrepreneur. Early on in the wireless industry, was the co-founder of Nextel, then started a venture capital fund. So I do think, like Steve and like many of us in this room, kind of get the notion that that policymakers ought to not at least infringe or impede the ability for you all to continue to stir the pot and grow the economy. I want to take kind of in reverse order of what Steve talked about, and what he's done with the Startup America Act and the President's Jobs Council really is, I think, laid it out quite clearly. I mean, we're in a global competition for talent. We're in a global competition for capital. And the talent piece, we've got to get not just high-skill immigration. I believe we've got to deal with comprehensive immigration reform. But, as we get into the question period, our legislation has pieces about entrepreneur visas, how do you make sure the folks who are here on student or H-1B, if they want to start a business here, they can do it here. How do we make sure that we go ahead and staple that green card to those graduate degrees in the STEM fields? We've been talking about that for a long time. Companion legislation that greatly expands the H-1B program, gets rid of some of the country caps. I mean, we can go into as much detail as we want on that subject. But, as Steve mentioned, the idea that this is going to be done as a standalone, separate, or somehow we're going to take the cream here at the top and not deal with the whole issue, it just isn't going to be the case. So one of the things I hope that you will be engaged and involved on is helping us get this complete immigration package through. We've seen the community step up on things like SOPA and PIPA on stopping something. I think we've got to show the tech community can also be part of passing something and not just stopping something. On the issue of capital, you're right. The Jobs Act, or we call it Startup 1.0, when it came around, has got some important components to it. And I'm going to save the last for crowdfunding, but trying to make sure that we get rid of some of the overly burdensome regulatory access to the public markets. I lived through the dot-com boom. I saw when we perhaps, the public markets were way too frothy.
Hey,
but,
some of us think that's the good old days.
Well, I know that. You
go easy.
But we went so far the opposite direction, and the Jobs Act does get rid of some of that. We also looked at the Jobs Act also, and this is an area that's a little dicier, on private placements. There are still a lot of problems with private placements out there. There's still more, what's the PC way to describe sleazy operations on the private placement side that, candidly, we may have gone a little too far in the Jobs Act on. Third area is we're going to take a fresh look, and the regulators are taking a fresh look at what the definition of a qualified investor ought to be. I think that really does require a fresh aspect, and that piece of the business is already open for business right now. And then the most disruptive and the most interesting, the most challenging, and the most awesome is crowdfunding. And as I say, this is a venture capitalist, angel investor, entrepreneur. It has an enormous power to be totally disruptive to the market. And where I think, as Steve mentioned, what got me so excited is somebody who, before I was governor, before I was senator, while I was still a tech guy, started a series of regional venture capital funds outside of Northern Virginia, in Virginia, so that you didn't have to. If you went to Virginia Tech, you didn't have to leave Blacksburg to get access to capital. And we kind of hit the wrong time, but the promise of the internet to democratize the world in terms of information and capital sharing has worked in major communities. But a whole lot of rural America and mid-size America is getting totally left behind. So crowdfunding, potentially, there'll be a lot of bumps along the way, is a very, very powerful tool. Last kind of update, just this past week, I sat down with the acting chair of the SEC, and I sat down with Mary Jo White, who is the president's proposed to be the incoming chair, and said and stressed, very important, we got to get these regs out. We've got to get this. If we take another 6, 9, 12 months to get these, all this pent-up energy is going to dissipate and go elsewhere. And I think we have to understand, and this is a challenge, because all our entrepreneurs are looking at doing portals. There's going to be a lot of folks who are going to lose money, and there's going to be some bumps. There's going to be some sleazy operations at the start of crowdfunding. What we have to, what I hope the regulators will understand, and it was a real challenge even with some of my colleagues to get them to understand, that unlike the old telephone boiler rooms that pitched unsavory private placements and other things, the power of the internet to self-regulate, the power of the internet to police, the notion, pardon me?
And the power of transparency.
And the power of transparency. The notion that 20 years ago we would have billions of dollars of trading going on, with the eBay kind of models. When we see the IndieGoGos and the others who are doing this on kind of the nonprofit space, getting into the for-profit space, this is a chance worth taking, because not only will it hopefully help a lot of you in this room, but it will hopefully allow the promise that many of us thought in the 90s would happen, that you don't have to move to find a world-class job, no matter where you grew up around the country, around the world. Crowdfunding could really be that piece that brings that early-stage capital to those communities. So let's have at it.
We applaud you, Senator Warner. And being from Cincinnati, Ohio, that's a problem that we have in the Midwest region. It's something that's very pervasive. And one of the things that I think is cool.
And Ohio is a swing state, my friend.
Yeah, and Steve lived there. He lived in Ohio for a little while.
Gamble guy,
yeah, P&G guy. So Jason, I think it'll be interesting to hear your opening comments, because you are an entrepreneur. And one of the cool things that happened, for those of you who don't know, in the Jobs Act was the real leadership from the private sector, besides from Steve, who has a great credibility, was from entrepreneurs, startup companies. And that really came from you and Woody and Zach. So can you talk about how you got involved?
Sure. I mean, we're all three entrepreneurs. My background, I've been in San Francisco in SaaS-based software companies since 1998. Had raised capital successfully, had some successes, had some failures. But in 2010, there was no access to capital. No matter how many press releases Bank of America had about new loan programs, there weren't any, no matter how good idea you had. And so, and we also were frustrated, the three of us were frustrated, because the laws that were written that were governing how you raise capital in 2010 at that time were written back before the telephone was in most people's homes.
1933.
1933.
I know, crazy.
And so we just said, in the age of Twitter, we need to be able to use our social networks to raise capital. And so we created this startup exemption framework, which was a regulatory framework that became part of the first Jobs Act language in the House and the Senate, and worked diligently with all parties, everybody, to really try to make it happen. And really is something that along the way we're able to meet a lot of great folks who wanted to be a part of this, regardless of party. And it really is a global issue. It's a global issue because as we travel around, and I'm talking about this at 5 o'clock today at the Four Seasons, about the global fight for crowdfunding. This concept that there are other countries that have the opportunity to leapfrog us now. Italy has legalized crowdfunding.
It's a new space race.
It is.
Yes.
I mean, it's a global fight for dollars and talent. And that's not only in cities in the U.S., but that's around the world. And although, for me, it's a very personal fight because I've lived in San Francisco for a long time now, but I grew up in a small town in Louisiana, just north of Lake Charles, for those of you who are local. And, there are no VCs there.
Right.
There are no angel clubs there. And I just personally refuse to believe that all the smart and talented people in this country live in 3 or 4 cities where all the VC money is. And so this is really about opening this up so that because the reason why all the people move to those places is because that's where the money is to go do the things you want to do. And so what we want to do is provide that opportunity. So if you want to live in San Francisco, that's fantastic, or Austin, that's fantastic. But if you want to live anywhere else and have a great idea.
Like Cincinnati.
And like Cincinnati, you should be able to live there and raise capital. So no, it's an exciting time, and it's great to see this room full and the folks who are joining us online. So it's great.
Awesome. So I think it's important for those of you in the audience to understand that there are different kinds of crowdfunding. And when we talk about the future of crowdfunding today, it's important to know what you can do today and what you'll be able to do sometime in the not so distant future. And we're so lucky that we have Slava here today because he is getting it done. He's been doing crowdfunding for years. He was crowdfunding before crowdfunding was cool. And so I think, Slava, it'd be interesting for you to talk about what you guys are currently doing at IndieGoGo and what will be permitted after we get all the rules figured out.
Sure. So my 2 founders and I, we got together in 2006.
You're like the ninja crowdfunder with us.
I'm
just looking at that.
He's Kung Fu Crowdfund.
There you
go. Kung Fu Crowdfunder.
That's actually a new site that I think is about to
Can we buy that? Can we buy that domain
crowdfunding.
name? Somebody buy that
down. Number 911. So we got together in 2006 in the fall. And we were just sharing our experiences of how frustrating it was to try to raise money on the internet for whatever the idea was. So Eric was on the board of a theater company. Danae had been working with different filmmakers and entrepreneurs. And my dad died of cancer years back when I was a kid. And I finally wanted to deal with it. And I started my own charity. And if you can remember 2006 for a moment, right, you're talking about MySpace is definitely bigger than Facebook. YouTube is not owned by Google yet. Twitter is nascent. It's probably just about to pop at South by Southwest. There's no brands at South by Southwest. And PayPal and your email is kind of how you try to raise money. And it was just really challenging. And at the time, you think about all the different channels that you can try to raise money from. You're thinking about your bank, your VC, the credit card. There's always somebody who gets to decide if you're allowed to have access to that capital. So interesting, the internet, the ultimate democratization tool, why has access to capital not been democratized? So on a whim, we just said, we know nothing better than to start something. And we launched in January 2008, definitely before the word crowdfunding was crowdfunding. And we actually reviewed the SEC laws and understood that what we thought was going to be an amazing idea was never going to be able to happen in the near term, but we thought we should just press forward. It's really exciting to now we're 5 years old, and we distribute millions of dollars across the globe every single week. And the thing that's most exciting is actually, we're now 5 years old, so this is the 5th time we're at South by, and we now have content or exhibitors or products or musicians or films represented at South by every single day. So if you combine...
Way to go, entrepreneurs.
If you combine just the South by, the folks that are represented at South by, that crowdfunded IndieGoGo, you're talking about dozens of campaigns, I think nearly $4 million in terms of the US, right? every single state has funded a campaign on IndieGoGo that is at South by this week. Every single state in America. 93 countries have funded campaigns that are represented at South by here. And so tonight you could go see a movie, Love Her Gun, or on Monday you could go see the premiere of Zero Charisma, which is going to be hilarious. And there's talks, musicians, and all kinds of amazing products, whether it's activity trackers, I see you have one on, or really mind-reading devices that will be able to help you move objects. So it's just really exciting, the impact that's happening.
That move Congress to a budget deal?
Yeah.
Let's crowdfund that. Can we crowdfund the budget?
It's called the Muse. Everybody would have to wear one. That'd be kind of cool. But it's actually, I think, a really exciting time. I try not to get caught up in the hype because there is a lot of hype about crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding, all that stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a lot of blocking and tackling that needs to happen. There's a lot of work that needs to happen. There's a lot of serious stuff in terms of fraud and customer support and logistics and regulatory rules you need to comply with. So, we're pretty proud of the way we treat our customers and the way we've worked with the different government organizations. If you look back, the 80s, in my opinion, was the decade of really computing. The 90s is online commerce. The 2000s goes down as social. In my opinion, the end of this decade, we'll look back, and this is a decade of access to capital, right? And it's going to be a very special decade. So, the way IndieGoGo looks at it is we launched 5 years ago, which in P&G is a company we've said in P&G time is not very long. So we have plenty of work to do. In internet time, we're a small dinosaur. And we really just focus on our customers right now. We use a lot of the donation-based and perk-based crowdfunding where you get a product or object or a thank you or something in return for your funding. There's no financial instrument or transaction. We are, though, very pro philosophically, and also the way we were active at the White House and with the SEC and in government. We're very pro equity crowdfunding. It's the idea of empowering anybody to have access to capital is really something special, both in America and globally. So we're definitely going to be pushing forward into that. When you ask me when we're going to launch, I don't have an answer to that because we really have to first know the rules. But we just want to be part of the whole entire movement of democratization of capital.
Awesome.
I'll just say one thing about some of the issues and challenges that are ahead, and they're very real. I think one of the things that's most exciting, and for the folks in this room who are looking for like an area to focus on for their entrepreneurial opportunities for the future, it's in addressing these challenges, addressing the challenges of security, addressing the challenges of verification, of all the different business problems that are going to be presented with equity crowdfunding comes to the table, is finding the technology solutions to solve them.
Yeah, crowdfunding is a new industry now, so it's ripe for disruption, right? It's a disruption by definition. So go ahead and start disrupting people. Let's bring this forward and let's make Absolutely. A big conversation about this next year at South by. Just one quick point of clarification. The Jobs Act is actually addressing all securities-based crowdfunding. It's not just equity crowdfunding, and I have a debt site, so that's why I need to always throw that out. So for you entrepreneurs in the audience, you will be able to, at some point in the not-so-distant future, raise capital and provide a return on investment. So today, what you can do on IndieGoGo and Kickstarter and other sites, Rocket Hub and others, is you can raise money in the form of donation and maybe give some swag to your donors. You cannot give them a return on their investment. That's the piece that's illegal. That's a security. And so you can't give them an interest rate return. You can't give them stock in your company. Now, let's go ahead and talk about fraud real quick. Several of you brought it up. And I'll kick it off with you, Jason, and then we can just open the dialogue. The media, and I see Pando Daily and others still that are in here, the media has many times said, Grandma is going to lose her life savings to a fraudster, to some bad deal on one of these crowdfunding platforms. What do you guys think about that? And how real is that? And what are your thoughts?
I mean, fraud's real. But I think that one of the things that's different, and I know I'm sure that you guys had a lot of these conversations in the Senate, was these boiler room concepts is a one-to-one communication. It's I'm calling you, I'm sending you an email, I'm knocking on your door, and I've got this great idea. And one-to-one communication is private, and a lot more opportunity exists for people to be defrauded. In a many-to-many world that we live in on the social web today, that's much more difficult. And you see this on sites. That's why the donation-based sites have been very successful, because of the algorithms they've created and because of the group vigilance that exists to finding people who are trying to commit fraud and shutting it down before any dollars are lost.
So I think the key thing, and this was a big debate. There was legitimate concern about people saying, awesome, this is a new tool, use the internet to allow people to raise capital, to start companies and scale companies. Seems like a good thing, but how do we make sure that people aren't defrauded? And people who invest recognize it's risky investing in startups. So obviously a lot of companies are going to be unsuccessful. Same time, some will emerge and be successful. So what are the tools to educate people? And one of the provisions that was put in was really requiring a platform, an intermediary, to be part of the equation that would, have certain restrictions, certain rules of the road, if you will. And I think people who are worried about that, and the Senate dealt with a lot of these, but I had a lot of discussions with people in the Senate and the House. They were worried about a traditional way of this might work, where kind of like the bucket shops and phone calls, sort of the one-to-one kind of thing, didn't really appreciate until they were educated the way these platforms work and how marketplaces over the last decade have evolved to have a key aspect of trust and reputation as a key ingredient. So getting those platforms right is critical. The other point, though, and it sort of was a little bit, and people sometimes thought it was a little bit flip, but it was worth reminding people that while now and since 1933 you needed to be an accredited investor to invest in a company, which essentially meant you needed to be rich in order to invest in a company with
rich,
the hope of getting richer. If you weren't rich, you didn't have the ability to do it. But everybody had the ability to go to Las Vegas. You didn't have to be an accredited gambler to go to Las Vegas and place a bet. Why did you have to be an accredited investor? And even though it was a little silly, it kind of made the point. We have to figure out how to draw the line here and strike the appropriate balance. I think finally the legislation that, and particularly as the Senate worked through some of the issues with Senator Warner's leadership and others on both sides of the aisle, they kind of struck a reasonable balance that allowed that to happen. The other point, though, is it's been possible for quite some time to sell 100% of your business. You could right now list 100% of your business on eBay, and you could sell that. That's no problem. You just couldn't sell 1%. That was illegal. So there were just some things that weren't quite thought through.
Gotta love government. No offense.
Based on these new throws. So basically, people embraced the idea, but there are people who support it who are concerned. So I think it's incumbent on all of us as the SEC writes these rules to make sure there is the right level of education of investors, the right level of industry regulation to make sure this idea does lift in a way that helps entrepreneurs, gives people who want to invest the ability to do it in a way that kind of protects people and strikes the right kind of balance. So it can't be people who just sort of say, oh, it's no big deal. I think that's a mistake, and that's sort of naive. At the same time, people say this can't possibly work because people are too stupid to make investment decisions. That's sort of naive because in the last 80 years since the 1933 security, the internet came up. People can make day trade if they want. There are a lot of things that people are allowed to do, and they should be allowed to do. It's the final point, and I'll have Senator Warner talk about it. It always bothered me, a little bit what you were saying in San Francisco, that take Mark Zuckerberg as an example. When he came up with the idea of Facebook, he happened to be at Harvard, and he happened to have a richer friend across the hall. Well, what if he hadn't been at Harvard? What if he'd been, I don't know, pick a state. What if he didn't happen to have probably that idea never would have seen the light of day. It wouldn't have helped the world, wouldn't have created an opportunity for the investors to make some money. And that is the reality for most of the nation. There's sort of like this entrepreneurial hotbed side of the country and then kind of the rest of the country. And we need to figure out ways to kind of even that out and give everybody with an idea a shot. Many ideas will fail. That is the nature of startups, the nature of a capitalism, the nature of a vibrant entrepreneurial economy. But some will succeed, and giving those entrepreneurs the ability to give them a chance is a key part of what crowdfunding is all about. So thank you for pushing for it in the Senate.
There were some wild conversations about how we got there. But I think, Jason, your point about the difference with the old model of being one-to-one versus the transparency component is really important, number one. Although I will quickly add, I always remember my first company I took public, didn't put anybody in it. It was Nextel, did quite well. Next one never got above its IPO price, and I put all my friends and family in it. That was the peak. Was
I like that you have my first company I took public.
Yeah, so
like you can say that in a sentence. That's so cool.
And so I do think there's going to be a level of awareness and education that's going to have to go on. I think these portals are going to be very important. You know, how much vetting is going to go on? How much screening? Is it going to be simply is it going to be judgments or just accounting standards? A host of complicated issues. And there's going to be a whole series of worthy businesses. There is a reason why traditional retail, traditional restaurants, and others don't have a lot of investors in them, even if they're successful, because it's hard to follow the money. So there's going to be perhaps a series of industries that I initially thought, for particularly when I think about kind of rural communities and elsewhere, that we may need to kind of, again, sort out on how we get it right. One of the things we've been thinking about, too, because there'll probably be somewhat of a step process here. There may be this notion that we're going to start with some level of qualified investors on equity first before you kind of phase into the next. And there are some discussions about, the old idea about qualified investor being, you got to have a net worth of $1 million or an annual salary or annual income of $250,000. May not be the right bettors. I mean, clearly in many communities around, owning a home that's worth $1 million, if you bought it at $100,000 20 years ago, may or may not. Maybe a better validation is to say, show us, an active brokerage account for X amount of dollars, and so you've got some history here. So I think there's that piece of kind of an interim step that is going to be thought through. And one of the things that you guys are going to have to be, I think, should be conscious of and be very aware of, is the fact that while there will be mistakes made, you're going to have to be vigilant on calling out bad actors early on. Right now, there was a recent survey, I forget who did it, maybe it was a journal or something, that they did 1,000 small businesses or 800 small businesses, and only 22% of them had even heard of crowdfunding at this point. This is still a very esoteric idea within a very small crowd of folks. It has a chance to kind of go viral extraordinarily quickly. And again, Slava, I want to thank you for coming out to Virginia, helping pitch the challenges and opportunities, as we did a series of these around the state, and people were very interested. But a lot of its success is going to be dependent upon you, because I can just assure you, the regulators cannot and will not totally get it right. And it is this enormous balance between setting at least some framework and not so over trying to figure out every answer that we stifle this opportunity before it gets started.
One thing I should say, because it ties in with the Startup America discussion where we began and what's going on across the hall, one of the focuses of the Startup America Partners was building up these regions, now launched in 30 different startup regions. And one of the real priorities going forward will be to use that mechanism, that platform, if you will, to educate people around crowdfunding in these other parts of the country. Because we talked about these regions that were underserved. That's the key place the education needs to happen. But it's also worth pointing out about sectors of the economy that are underserved. There's too much focus at a place like South by around technology, which is great, and obviously I'm a big evangelist for technology. But there are a lot of great entrepreneurial companies that have been started that aren't technology companies, and crowdfunding is going to be super helpful for them. Chipotle, it's like
Under Armour,
burrito. It's now worth $10 billion. The food trucks that are today there, some of those will say, I want to go and actually have a restaurant. Some of them will end up being 10 restaurants, and some of them might be 100 or 1,000 restaurants.
Or there may be 1,000 food trucks across multiple cities.
It could be the next Chipotle. Under Armour is a good example. Kevin Plank, who started that, happened to have some friends at Maryland and provided some of the seed funding. Now that's a global brand, again, worth billions of dollars. Another one in upstate New York. Immigrant entrepreneur Hamdi Ulukaya took over a failed factory 7-8 years ago, decided to kind of retool it and was able to raise a little bit of money, actually got an SBA loan. That's now Chobani Yogurt. It's a $1 billion business with 1,500 American workers. So this is the story of America. It's around entrepreneurship. Those guys got lucky. They were able to figure out some way to get the capital necessary to get on the playing field. We just need to make sure crowdfunding gives more people that opportunity.
So we've got a bunch of entrepreneurs in the room, and I want to make sure that we talk to the entrepreneurs here today. And they're coming here and they want to know how to do this stuff, right? What do you, entrepreneurs, how are you going to be successful with crowdfunding? I'm curious, and I'd like to start with you, Slava. Can you give some just practical tips? If somebody has a business, are there certain businesses that do better than others on your platform? Are there certain tips and tricks that work well with you guys that you might want to give them some hints on?
So that's actually a softball because I'm speaking tomorrow for an entire hour. And it's called Go Fund Yourself. And
oh, my gosh.
The whole idea
I was going to take that as my tagline for my company. Shoot.
The whole idea is we're going to expose to you all the data and the tips and tricks, not opinions, that are proven to work to have a successful crowdfunding campaign. So you should definitely check that out tomorrow.
What time? Where?
It's tomorrow at Ballroom D, I think, at like 12:30. But I'm still going to take this moment to answer the previous question because I think it's really important. A lot of people in the most recent year since the Jobs Act was signed have come up to me and they say, oh, Slava, you know, with equity crowdfunding, you really have to start thinking about fraud. I mean, that's going to be a big deal. That's like going to be rough. How are you going to think about fraud? And I was just on Bloomberg TV, and they're like, when equity crowdfunding comes out and you get involved, how are you going to start thinking about fraud? We distribute millions of dollars every week to almost every country around the world. We've been doing this for 5 years. Any business, any industry that has millions of dollars going through it every week, people are going to try to defraud that industry or that company.
Sure. Good point.
So we've been dealing with fraud and attempted fraud for about 5 years and 2 months, which is how old we are. So, and we're really proud of the fact that you don't have some, you know, it bleeds, it leads, crazy IndieGoGo stories because it hasn't happened. That doesn't mean that we're not dealing with it every day behind the scenes. Our fraud rates are well below 1%. We're very proud of that. We work with the SEC explaining all that. And it's not easy. And I am concerned about, poor stakeholders are trying to jump into the crowdfunding game. I think it's actually very easy to create a crowdfunding website. Very easy. You should like go do it, get somebody, you know, in another country to make it for you in a few minutes. You can do it. It's very hard to create a crowdfunding platform. Websites are just, you know, some colors and some user design, which is all relevant, right? But that doesn't stop the bad guys, figure out processes, and figure out how to have a good experience. And you know, we've been doing this for 5 years, and I think there's 3 things that matter about fraud. Number 1 is you need to have the vigilance internally, which is we do it all through a lot of data mining, just the way credit card companies do it and other internet companies, which is, you know, statisticians with propeller heads and like doing all this analysis. And then the second is exactly what's been talked about twice, which is the transparency of this new system actually in itself does a good job of managing the process. It's not the end-all be-all because you still need to have all the data systems and workflows. And then the third thing, which will be very important for equity crowdfunding, which was already important.
Securities-based crowdfunding. Just clarify. Go ahead.
There you go. Securities-based crowdfunding, which was just as important for perks-based and donation-based, is education. People take for granted that this is a 5-year-old company that we have now. I'll say so far a 5-year-old industry. It took us years of education before people started to get it. And we only have 22% of the people, you know, that get it at all right now. So equity crowdfunding, it's not like you're going to turn it on and it'll be instantaneously, everybody gets it. You're going to go through a whole lot of effort of education. And the last thing I'll say in terms of like fraud and the government, all this stuff, is an amazing thing happened with the internet, which was about 20 years ago, plus minus, the internet came out. And the internet had all this online commerce. And the first thing everybody started talking about was grandma and orphans losing their money because their bike wasn't come through, and this was going to get stolen, and that wasn't going to get fulfilled, and taxes this and the other, and whatever. And everybody was about to just shut it down because lots of regulation. And somehow, I think it was during the Clinton administration, I wasn't that old, but they got together and they said, you know what, let's actually like just give the leaders of the industry and some other folks and the entrepreneurs who can have to solve all these problems, here's a little bit of room. Try to figure this out. If you mess it up at all, you're done. But just go try to figure this out, which is exactly how I would try to deal with, you know, securities crowdfunding. Because if you over-regulate it, you'll kill it before it gets a chance to run. And other countries will do
So
it.
I think it's time to elect Slava Rubin to run for U.S. Senate, because you did a great job of taking my question, but answering the one you wanted to answer. Good job, good job, good job.
And promoting a session tomorrow. That was great.
No offense, Senator.
Candidate 101 training.
Okay, so you are entrepreneurs. So I'm going to start off by giving some tips, and I'm hoping that my friends over here will jump in with some tips for you. If you're going to be doing crowdfunding campaigns, what are some things that can help make you successful? Kate Drain, who's with IndieGoGo, she's in the back. She and I do seminars all the time on this. But first of all, your videos. Having a video, it's just like on Match.com, right? The people who actually put their pictures up get dates. Okay, so putting videos up, actually telling your story, putting your personality out there is super important. Your story becomes extremely important as an entrepreneur. You need to think about how you're going to communicate that in a video. One of the things with securities-based crowdfunding is transparency of information. You're actually going to have to put your business plan up on the website for the world to read. Now, you're going to have to think about getting comfortable with sharing elements of your business plan. Are there other tips, guys?
Just add one thing. This is not just crowdfunding, but it's for anybody who's been as a VC for a decade plus. Worst thing about particularly first-time entrepreneurs is they always have ramp lines that look like this. They're going to go from
I've got one of those.
0 revenues to 50 million in
Slava,
a 24-month ramp. And some of this stuff is just non-believable. That's I know this is a dirty word to say in this crowd, but that's the value add the venture capitalist is supposed to sort through that stuff. And there will be this sense that if you become too optimistic, if your business plan is too good to be true, chances are it is too good to be true. And that is going to be something, again, where I think choosing a portal, depending on how all these portals are going to, I think your point too is a good one, Slava, the difference between a website and a portal. Which portals are going to have higher quality?
I hear SoMoLend is good.
I would go more for quality than for just trying to get out there as quick as possible.
The other thing I'd say is it is getting easier to get companies started. It costs less money, and with crowdfunding, it'll be easier for people who don't have access to capital, have access to capital. As a result, more companies will get started. Good thing. That's one of the things we're promoting with Startup America, because it can create innovation and jobs, all the things I talked about. But also, if there are a lot of people who are doing it, each segment is going to be even more cluttered. That then creates this sort of Darwinian kind of process of kind of the survival of the fittest, and the battle then shifts to a battle for attention. And so trying to figure out a way to get noticed becomes more important. On these crowdfunding platforms, once you launch, getting some sense of momentum, getting the initial people, ideally some credible people who are initially investing in it, that will result in you popping up and other people then taking it more seriously. So it is a way to replicate kind of what happens in the venture world, although that is pretty small. By the way, high growth companies in the country, only 14% get venture capital, which proves that there are a lot of companies that do a lot of interesting things all over the nation that don't get venture capital. But part of the process is if you have a credible venture capitalist, more people are interested in investing. If Steven Spielberg becomes executive producer of your movie, more people, actors and other funders and people want to be part of that movie. So getting that credibility, getting that trust, getting that reputation, getting that momentum is critical. It's not just enough to put it on the site, put a nice video out there and kind of wait for people to instantly find you. You're going to still have to work at it to break through and win that battle for attention.
One of the things that we say about crowdfunding, and actually I've been pitching venture capitalists now for a year and a half, and it's not been fun. And I can tell you that what we always talk about in investing is everyone wants to date the football player because everybody wants to date the football player. So you have to create the sense that you're popular already. One of the things that Kate and I always joke about is if you set up a crowdfunding campaign and send out a press release to Pando Daily tomorrow and say, check out my campaign, and they log on and you haven't raised $5, well, they're saying, what, you can't even get your parents to donate to you? You need to think about that stuff in advance. You need to actually think about how you can raise 25 to 30% of your campaign before you ever get started. Soft circling, we call it in the VC world, right? And it's no different for you, the crowdfunding entrepreneur. You need to circle some of that money in advance so that when you do send that press release out, there's actually a story to write about. And I think that's going to be an important trick.
Which, by the way, nobody in the nonprofit sector, that's also what they do. Nobody announces.
Nobody announces a capital campaign.
I'm on the board of Region of the Smithsonian, which has a big campaign underway, but it actually has been underway for 2 years and will be under the radar for another 2 years before they finally announce it. And said, guess what? There'll be a bunch of commitments that are part of that. So that is one of the things in terms of creating that momentum and fighting that, kind of breaking through the clutter.
So secretly, I'm about to pitch you like in a month or so, and I just closed on $2 million. High five.
All right.
Are you more interested now? Okay, Jason.
It's like the fifth grade dance. No one wants to be the first one on the dance floor, and so you have to have people that are there ready. I think another piece of this that's really important to talk about is, so you got your money, congratulations. Now what? And a really important piece that we have, sort of beginning with the end in mind, is now that I've got these investors and I've been successful, how am I going to communicate with them in an effective way so that I can keep them as investors in the long term, maybe have them follow on, maybe have them become advisors and angels, be able to really tap their experience. So it's almost like democratizing access to capital, but maybe we also can democratize access to expertise because people who we can tap different types of expertise, bring in angels, bring in VCs. I mean, I think it's one of them, from my own perspective, is a lot of times I get asked questions, what does this mean for angel investing? What does this mean for VCs? I think this is a great thing for both. I think it's great deal flow. It's more deal flow for both entities, and it's a great chance for these types of funding mechanisms to work together in some new and interesting ways.